All right, we're gonna get going. Welcome everyone. Welcome to the last session of the ProLink Tech Live this year. I hope you have just enjoyed Coffee and Bagel. That was the last Coffee and Bagel for this year's conference. And for those who have participated in at least one Coffee and Bagel at this year's conference, we thank you and for stopping by and saying hi to us. And it was great seeing you virtually. So same drill, we'll randomly select one participant from the Coffee and Bagel we just closed as a winner for the $50 Starbucks gift card. And the winner will be receiving an email from us in a few minutes, so please be on the lookout for that. The session you have just joined is Risk, and it'll be conducted by Kelly Encinias at ProLink Solutions. And before we start the session, I'd like to take a few minutes to cover some housekeeping items. First, on the right side of the screen, you have access to the chat feature. In order to use it, you first have to hit the join button. And after that, you'll see this little red dot notifying you of any messages from other attendees. Please feel free to post any questions or comments throughout the session in the chat, and we'll provide responses in real time or follow up individually after the session. Please note that your posts are visible to all other attendees. The next one is the poll. So as we go through the session, 3 poll questions will be displayed one by one. And when you provide your response each time, you'll be able to see the poll result in real time. So we encourage you to participate. Lastly, this is where you can download a copy of Kelly's PowerPoint on the session page in the Attendee Hub. So you can download anytime before, during, or after the session. And so now, without further ado, we'll begin the session. So Kelly, you can share your screen and please take it away.
Thank you, Ryan. Ryan, give me a quick confirmation that you can see my screen, okay?
Yes.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining the session today. As Ryan mentioned, we're gonna talk about risk in ProLink HFA. So you can see our session agenda here. We'll start out and take a minute to look at a property risk assessment. So, you know, the details specific in a particular property. Next, we'll take a minute to look at configuring our risk assessment criteria. Little bit of a refresher there. I would mention that kind of both at the property level and at that risk assessment criteria level, we're not necessarily going to dive into all the nuts and bolts in each of those screens and go through all the content. But as you can see, we have a DCR risk criteria example, an NOI risk criteria example, and an inspection risk criteria example. So I think as we go through those examples, we are going to be in both our property risk assessment and our configuration area for the risk criteria. So I think it'll give you a pretty good refresher, pretty good brush up on that. So let's get started here. So we start out with our property risk assessment. So, you know, again, looking at the risk assessment from the property level, we're going to dive into some of these tabs here. A quick note on kind of this session slide deck and the fact that we'll be going live. I think all of the screens that I'll be showing to you today are included in this session slide deck. You know, so you'll be able to reference back to these later, but I'm going to go ahead and go live in the system now and just use my slide deck for kind of referential notes. So here we are. I'm live in ProLink HFA here. Again, remember, I'm in my demonstration environment. So, you know, the data here is somewhat real, although not real life. So keeping that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and head into my risk assessments for my Garden Court Apartments property. So as I slide down here in my left navigation menu, I can see my risk assessments menu option. I click in, and just like lots of you are familiar with, you know, I access kind of the list screen, right? Giving me all the risk assessments that have previously been executed. And so for today's purposes, I'm going to go ahead and create a new risk assessment, because as you'll notice, everything that I have here existing for my property is finalized. And so when I have that assessment status, I can no longer edit those risk assessments. So let's go for a new one. And that way we can edit and tinker about with the risk assessment and kind of see changes that we're going to work on today. So as I create that new risk assessment, you'll see when I first come to this screen, kind of in this top sort of header area, I can see that I have a final risk assessment points there showing to me kind of at the upper right of the screen there. And then I've got the status that falls into, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And then I've got subjective criteria on my main tab, and then notice across, I've got several other tabs. So let's talk for just a minute about this main tab and what's available here in terms of my subjective criteria. So what we mean by subjective criteria is that, as you can see, you have these text boxes here next to all these different criteria or categories. And so the subjectivity comes in the fact that, your asset manager, your risk officer, whoever is working on this particular risk assessment, they have the ability, using the point values here in the subjective criteria, to actually change or affect the risk assessment points overall for the property, and thereby affecting that risk status. So, let's say that, my replacement reserve balance here for my annual financials, that's reading at 180. And just so that you know, the information that's displayed here in the detail for these various categories is being supplied to this risk assessment from various records throughout the property. And we'll talk a little bit more about that here in a minute when we visit our activity detail tab. Okay. But I can actually assign a point value for any of these criteria, and overall affect the score and the status of this current assessment. So, let's say that, for my agency, for my risk model, 180 is too low of a reserve balance for this property. So I'm going to assign points that will increase my total assessment points, which will move me from a watch to an at risk. And so let's just say I assigned 20 points, that's kind of high, but that'll for sure move us up into that at risk status. I want to record a comment about why I'm assigning those points. And then if I do a save, then I'm going to see my assessment points and my status ultimately increase for this specific assessment. Okay, so you can see my points went up to a 34, and then of course my status went up to an at risk. Okay, so that's what we mean here on this main tab by subjective criteria. Again, the asset manager or officer who's responsible can affect that overall score and ultimately that overall status. Okay. An item that I have kind of as a question kind of in this slide deck is, should you, for your agency, be requesting additional criteria to be added to the risk model? That's going to be a factor of you reviewing the system generated criteria that we have, which we'll dig into here in a minute, but also reviewing this subjective criteria and what all is available here. Formulate those ideas and those requests that you might have based on consideration of both your subjective and your system criteria. Okay, so let's go ahead now and take a look at our activity detail tab. So what's going on here is kind of it's an explanation. It's truly a detailing of what is being included, or what is being reviewed or analyzed in terms of the records in your property for this particular risk assessment. Okay, so what we're looking at here is a listing of inspections records on your property. Which inspection records are being used in this particular assessment? And so you'll see, as an example for my tax credit inspection, yes, it's required. So it's included in my assessment. And then the fiscal year that's used for my tax credit inspections, because remember, I'm going to have those year over 3 years, really, probably something along that line. So I need to know, which record is being used in this assessment. Note that for your inspection records, you're using the inspection record of whatever type you're looking at. So remember, we're thinking about tax credit inspections. So tax credit inspection that has a completed status. Okay, so if I kind of hop over very quickly to my inspections records listing, let's just take a moment to look at this. You can see I've got many inspections listed, right? But remember, I was thinking about which tax credit inspection is included. Well, I can see that I have a tax credit inspection for 2021, but the status of that is not completed. So that one's not being used. I've got a tax credit inspection for 2020, but again, the status of that is not completed. So that's not the inspection that's being used. The next tax credit inspection that I see is my 2019 record. And in fact, that record does have a status of completed. So that's the inspection record for tax credits that's being used in that assessment that I'm performing in the property. Okay, so I'm going to hop back into my assessments menu item there and hop back into that pending assessment that I just created that I'm using. And let's turn our attention back to that activity detail tab. So that's what's happening there with the inspection records that are being used. We can take a look here at our, our standardized financials, our financials records, annual and monthly. Which ones there are being used? Again, we look to the fiscal year used and we see that we're using 2021. And that's because that annual financial for the year 2021 is in a status of either approved or revised. Okay, so same concept there, right? We're really utilizing the latest record of each of these types from the property that are in, this sort of completed or approved type of status. Okay, as we kind of look further kind of down the line here, we then think about our compliance audits, our file reviews, what record is being used there. Again, our 2021 record is what's being considered for this assessment because that's the latest record that is in, again, a completed status. And then finally, we have our compliance review. Which compliance review record is being considered? We're using that 2022 record because that's a compliance review that's in a finalized status. So as we kind of think about these records that are being used in the risk assessment, and why are we looking, kind of in some cases backwards, to potentially an earlier record, like in the case of our inspections for sure. We're looking for those completed or approved or finalized records to use in this assessment because when those records move to those types of statuses, they're no longer editable. So with an overall risk assessment, we can be sure when we're considering those records that are no longer editable, that those values are not going to be changed kind of underneath or behind the scenes of that assessment, right? When we're looking at those no longer editable records to do that assessment, we know that that data is now confirmed, completed, approved. It's now static, and that assessment is truly looking at and reviewing that data, you know, as it is now kind of committed for all time. Okay, that's the reason behind using, you know, those particular records. And important always when you're doing an assessment to, you know, take a moment to come into that activity detail tab and really confirm what are you using, you know, why, when we look at, you know, our system generated criteria and we see points being generated, why? What is the data that we're truly using? So you'll always want to take a look at and really study that detail tab to understand, you know, what this assessment truly is evaluating. You can also scroll further down the screen to see, you know, a few detail items from those particular sections that are being considered in this particular assessment. And as always, you know, remember that you can access any of the records there in your left navigation menu to dig in even deeper to, you know, why am I receiving a point value, or, you know, what's being considered in this particular assessment. So let's take a minute now and look at our system generated criteria tab. So what's happening here is we have, for our risk model, we have various criteria configured to use in this assessment. When I access my generated criteria tab, I'm seeing those items that are configured for use with the property at the particular time, okay? The different sections that you can see kind of delineated by those kind of tan colored grouping rows are going to display kind of expanded or open for you to notate for you visually the different criteria that is configured and is receiving a score, okay? I also am able to see within each of those sections the specific criteria description itself, as well as the point value at the far right there that is being assigned to that criteria for this property for this particular risk assessment. Okay, so let's dig into that for just a minute and kind of dial that in for everybody. So what we're talking about is for my Garden Court Apartments property, right? That's the property that I'm using for my annual financial. And remember, we looked at our activity detail and we were using our 2021 annual financial. So this criteria is looking at our DCR after reserve deposits, and it's evaluating it to be at a value between 1.2 and 1.0. And so if my DCR in that annual financial is falling in that range, I'm getting a point value of 1.00. Because I see that point value listed in that far right column, that tells me that my DCR is in fact falling within that range. Okay, that's what that really means. And so as we kind of look down our listing here, we can see the other criteria that are used to consider the DCR for that property. We can see that we're looking at a greater than 1.2. We're looking at 1.0 to 0.8, and we kind of go on down the line. So you know, if my DCR was not within that range 1 to 1.2, I might be getting a point value in one of these other criteria categories. And so as we move along further today, we'll tinker about with some of these numbers so that we can kind of see how that changes and what that looks like in the property and how it affects our score. Okay, but you know, that is how we review on our system generated criteria tab. That's how we can understand, as we look to the top here, we're getting 14 points for this property. Where is that coming from? That's what this detail is describing to me. I've got 1 point coming from that annual financial. I've got 3 points coming from my tax credit inspection. I've got 3 points coming from a general inspection. I've got 5 points coming from a compliance audit or a file review. Another 2 coming from our compliance review. Okay, so each of those sections is giving me the detail of how am I getting to 14 points. Okay, now as I am performing this risk assessment, you know, this is where you're going to be guided into, okay, let me review the detail of each of these items that actually are generating a score. You know, if, you know, like for example, with my tax credit inspection, look at that. This is indicating to me that I have an overall inspection result of needs improvement. Let me take a look at that and see what's really going on there. Okay, so this is kind of directing our eyes or our consideration to, you know, what do we need to consider for this particular property. Okay, so that's just kind of a quick and dirty reminder, refresher about the risk assessment at the property level. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a little first poll question here. So Ryan, if you can go ahead and put up our first poll question for us. So this question is, does your current risk model focus on your profit and loss or your balance sheet in your financials, or both? So Ryan, let me know that you've got that poll question opened for everybody. And we'll give everybody a few minutes to go ahead and answer that question.
Yeah, it's up.
Great. Again, does your current risk model have a focus into the profit and loss or the balance sheet, or both in the annual audited financials? We'll keep that open here for a few more minutes. And guys, I'm not as cool as Sarah. I don't have the music for our poll questions. Sorry.
That's okay, Karen.
Okay, I feel like we're ready to do a countdown, Ryan, if that's okay. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Ryan, go ahead and close that poll. And if you can share results with us, that'll be great. We'll give Ryan just a second to get those results out to us here.
It's ready, Kelly.
Awesome, Ryan. Thanks. Oh, I am not seeing the results, Ryan, in my deck.
Yeah, I'll just verbally share with you. So 0 response for P&L, 1 for balance sheet, 14 for both.
Awesome. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for sharing that information with us today. Let's go ahead and move into our next section here. So here, we're going to take a look at configuring our risk assessment criteria. So just to start out for a moment here in our slide deck, and then we'll go live in the system. we are going to be going into our utilities menu panel. We're going to be accessing our AM, or asset management folder group there. And then we're going to be heading into our risk assessment settings. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and break out of that slide deck and go, live in the system here. So remember, I'm coming into my utilities menu panel there in my left navigation. I'm looking at my asset management folder there. And remember, I can expand and collapse those. And then I'm heading into my risk assessment settings. Okay. So as I click in there, I then am positioned at the edit screen for all of my risk assessment settings. So as a quick refresher here for those of you who are familiar, this could be new to some of you, and that's okay too. I'm positioned initially at my status tab here, and this is where I'm really configuring those status groupings for the risk assessments that I'm doing. I have the ability to control what those statuses are called. I have the ability then to control the beginning and ending point values. So the ranges that create those different statuses. Now, the way that I have our example created here in our demonstration environment is that a higher point score in a risk assessment is bad, right? That puts us at risk. If your particular risk model kind of does the evaluation the other way, you could just flip these point values so that your risk evaluation, your risk assessment would be looking for a lower point value to be an at-risk type of scenario, okay? And if you have questions about that, or you kind of want to talk about any of what that means, please reach out to us. We're more than glad to look at what you're doing today and how that could fit into ProLink, okay? And then, of course, you'll notice across the top here, we have many tabs offering all of the different criteria that are available to us to configure for our risk model. We have Fin Annual, which is our annual or audited financials. We have FinMo, which is our monthly financials, okay? If we've got a property that's really, really struggling and not financially healthy right now, we might be collecting monthly financials and we might be doing more frequent risk assessments. And so configuration here in those monthly financials criteria is available. Of course, we have inspections. We looked at that earlier in our actual risk assessment at our property level. We have loan and reserve information, compliance audits or file reviews, compliance reviews, property management, insurance, and then we've got some miscellaneous items that you can use for some kind of more custom or specific monitoring that you might be doing in your properties. I want to make a note that it's important as you might be kind of delving into the risk assessment model and considering configuring this for your agency. Many of the items that are available here, might take some consideration, some review, some translation from your existing model into the model as it exists within ProLink HFA. So, I want to offer up to you that, take a little bit of time and really study and compare what your model looks like today as compared to what's offered here within the system, and make those translations and, kind of try to make this work for you. As we always say, and we always offer up to you, if you're having trouble doing that translation, if you're uncertain about items that might be in your current risk model and how they could work within ProLink HFA, please reach out to us. We're here to help with those kinds of items, and we can help do that translation for you. Okay. So as you can see on each of these tabs, there are many criteria that are available for you to configure. I want to note kind of some of the flavors or some of the options that are available across these, many different tabs that offer criteria. So, as we look at DCR here, we kind of have, 5 options that are available to review or assess DCR in an audited financial. We can create these ranges that we consider based on the value that's found in that audited financial. So important to note, not only do we have control of the ranges that we're looking at here, but we also have control, as we look kind of to the far right here, we have control of the point value that's assigned. Okay. So, several options across these tabs have, multiple items that we can evaluate ranges and assign those different point values. Okay. One of the other kind of interesting and cool options that we have is if we look at inspections, we're actually able across each of the inspection types to utilize our overall inspections results pick list, so we can add evaluation or consideration of the multiple overall inspection results that we might be using in our agency. So, in addition to, again, that point value that's available. So to take that one step further, because that, pick list, as we call it, is available here in our risk evaluation, that supports the ability for us to control and create our own results values that we use within our agency. And that's why we see that selection offered there, is because your pick list might not match the pick list that we have here in our demonstration environment. And that's okay. You can configure your overall inspections results items in the way that you need to based on the values that you're using. Okay. With that, we are ready for another poll question. So Ryan, go ahead and put up that second poll question there for us. So this question is inquiring and asking you to select all the items that are included in your current risk model. Okay, so select all that are applicable. Ryan, let us know that you've got that poll available.
The poll is up.
Awesome, thank you. Ryan, this one's going to be a little bit trickier for you to speak out the results on this one, so I apologize, but that's okay. We'll get through it.
Yeah.
We'll leave that open for just a few seconds longer before we close that and consider those results. So again, select everything from that list that you are using in your risk model today in your agency. Few more minutes there. Ryan, do you think we're okay to head into the countdown?
Yeah. So
okay.
It's pretty equally distributed. And let me just copy and paste just in case it show up this time. Okay. But I'll be ready to go over it.
And yep, Ryan, for whatever reason, I am not seeing those results in my deck.
So Kelly is very equally distributed. So 17% A, 14% B, 19% C, 14% D, 14% E, 11% F, 8% G.
Okay.
Equally distributed Fairly, yeah.
Across those different areas. Okay, great. Awesome. Thanks everybody for participating in that poll. And let's go ahead and move into our first risk criteria example. So what we're going to talk about and look at here is our DCR risk criteria. Again, this is an example that focuses on our annual audited financials and that DCR calculation that we assess from those audited financials. So I'm going to go ahead and break out live into the system here so that we can look at this. So I'm going to start out in looking here in our risk assessment settings and taking a look at how we currently have our DCR configured. So right now for our DCR, remember we have, our 5 options that are available. So for a DCR greater than 1.2, we give no points, right? Because remember, higher points in my model is bad, right? So a 1.2 is good. That's where we want people to be, no points. And so you can kind of see as we go down the line, 1.2 to 1, I'm giving 1 point, 1 to 0.8, 2 points. And as we kind of go down the line, okay? So this is how I currently have my DCR configured. So let's go ahead now and go look at our DCR in our sample property. That's our Garden Court Apartments. Let's look at where that DCR is sitting right now for our current assessment and how we're getting there. And then we're going to actually go in and make some changes to our annual financials. And we'll take a look then at how that affects our assessment. So I'm heading into my annual financials right now, annual audited financials. And remember, my risk assessment was using my 2021. So that's where I'm headed there, is into that annual 2021 record. So right now, as I look at the data that's supplied within my 2021 record, if I look at my financial analytics and I just click that button in my top toolbar to dig into my analytics, and then I click my analytics button to actually view those details. So as I sit right now, in terms of my DCR for this particular property, I am at a 1.16 right here. So I'm looking down here in my core metrics for my fiscal year 2021. My DCR is sitting at a 1.16 right now, okay? So what does that mean for my risk assessment? Let's hop back in to the property and look at that risk assessment. So remember, my DCR right now is a 1.16. So the point value that I receive in my assessment is 1 point, okay? And that's because with a DCR at 1.16, I'm falling in that range of 1 to 1.2, okay? So that is why I see that score or that point value of 1 for my DCR in my property right now, okay? So let's take a look at how does my assessment change if I edit one of the values in my financials with that same rating or that same value range that I have configured right now for my DCR. So I'm heading back into my annual financial here, and I'm going to go into my profit and loss tab, right? Because that's where my DCR values are coming from. And I'm going to go ahead and edit my admin general financial line item. Now, I'll note for everybody, I have included in our slide deck the various values that are used in the DCR calculation right now, just for a reference for you. So I'm editing that 6,200 line item right now in that annual financial. So you'll notice what I did there is I doubled that admin expense, right? So that is going to negatively affect my DCR for this property. So let's hop in to our financial analytics now that I've modified that admin line item. And let's take a look at what that does to our DCR. So again, as I come into financial analytics, I have to click that view analytics button that's kind of center screen there to generate all this detail in the lower portion of the screen. So as I slide down, I can see now that my DCR value, look at that, it has dropped to a 0.78, okay? And well, it should, right? My admin line item doubled, right? So that negatively affects my DCR. So with a DCR now at 0.78, let's go take a look at that risk assessment and see how it affects the assessment by letting that DCR drop or seeing that DCR drop in that way. So as I hop back into my risk assessment menu option here and come back into my pending risk assessment, then I can see my DCR value and where that's following in my criteria now. So here I am again on my system generated criteria tab. I can see that now I'm getting a full 3 points now from my annual financials. And that's because I see the range that my DCR is falling into now, right? Remember at a 0.78, it's falling in this range that I have of 0.6 to 0.8, which yields a full score of 3 points, okay? And so we see that our overall point score for our property, increased, right? Because of that drop in that DCR, okay? So, so I can, I can definitely see, and this is kind of what I want folks to sort of kind of get comfortable with and realize, how the changes in these different records that are used by your risk assessment really affect that overall score, either up or down in the property, depending on what's happening to those numbers. Okay. So we took a look there at how our risk score is affected when we change a value that's inside of our annual financials record that's being reviewed, right? So now let's go ahead and take a look for a minute at what happens if we make an adjustment to the actual risk criteria that we're considering and how that's going to affect that overall score in that risk assessment for our property. So let me hop back into my utilities menu panel, and I'm going to come back into my risk assessment settings. Okay. And I'm going to make an adjustment to that, my DCR, right? My value ranges that I'm using right now. So I'm going to go ahead and modify this kind of number 4 value range that I'm considering, that I'm evaluating for the DCR in my property. Okay. And so right now, remember my property, as we left my property, my DCR right now is at a 0.78. So it's going to fall in this range of 0.6 to 0.8. Right now, the point value that I'm assigning for a DCR that falls in this range is 3. So I'm going to increase the point value to 5. Okay. So now in my risk assessment, if I have a DCR that falls within the range of 0.6 to 0.8, my property is going to get 5 points instead of 3 points. So let's go back over to our property and let's open that risk assessment and see how that changes the overall point value in that risk assessment. So you'll remember when we were here just a minute ago, we were sitting at a 19. We were sitting at a 41, right? Because I had added that enormous subjective criteria. So I'm now increased from a 3 for that DCR assessment. I went from a 3 now to a 5. Okay. So, that can, if I come back to my main tab, let me take out that 20 so that we can really see the effect of going from that 3 to 5. I will stay in that at-risk section, but, just that change either in the criteria evaluation, right? Going from a 3 to a 5 for a DCR of 0.78, that can move my property from, a watch status to an at-risk. And likewise, as I change that value, that admin line item value within the annual financial record itself, again, that value can push me into a point difference, right, of going from 1 point to 3 points for that DCR evaluation that, again, can move me between a potentially watch type status into a risk status and vice versa. Okay. So I really am wanting to kind of give you all kind of the tools and the confidence to, get into your testing environments and really start digging into this criteria, and looking at it and see what it looks like and see how it acts and see how the various changes, whether in your criteria itself or in the detail in your actual property, make an effect in your overall risk assessment. Okay. I'm trying to give you the tools to really get in there, tinker about, feel comfortable, and work toward, that translation of getting your model, into ProLink HFA. Okay. I think we have just a little under 15 minutes left. So I'm going to skip ahead a little bit in terms of thinking about what we're looking at here in the slide deck. So within our slide deck, the next example that I have is NOI, net operating income. Again, this is in our audited financials and somewhat similar to what we look at with DCR in terms of, we can change, again, that 6,200 line item, right, in our financials. Again, doubling that admin line item. And we can see with the current configuration that we have for NOI, our risk score in that category can go from a 0 to a 3 with just that single number change in our financials. Okay. Similar to kind of what we saw with our DCR. And likewise, when we think about the NOI criteria that we have configured, right, in that utilities menu, as we go from, oh, I have the wrong screenshot there, guys. I'll get that updated for you. But as I go from, considering where is my NOI per unit sitting at, if I'm looking at below 2,700 per unit as the criteria that I'm evaluating, if I have that point value set at 3 and I increase that point value to a 5 for that particular configuration item, again, with NOI per unit, I can affect that overall risk assessment score, even with that simple 2 points, right? Again, I can take that property from a watch to an at-risk or vice versa, okay? So let's go ahead now and pop up, Ryan, that final poll question that we have available before we head into our final example. So Our final poll question is, how do you execute or evaluate your current risk model today? Are you using ProLink HFA software? Are you using maybe an Excel model? Are you using possibly a Word model? Or are you using something else? Ryan, let us know that that poll's available.
It is up.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. We'll give a few seconds for folks to give some response there before we close that thing down. Okay, Ryan, I think we're ready for a countdown. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And Ryan, let us know what the results that we're seeing there out of that poll.
Yeah, interesting. So 4 responses for A, 3 for B, and 2 for D.
Okay, great. Great. Thanks, guys. Thank you so much for participating in that poll. That was our last poll for our 2022 Tech Live. So thanks so much for your participation there. Let's go ahead and head into our final example here. We're going to take a look at an inspection risk criteria. And we're going to go ahead and look at this, the same way that we looked at DCR, the same way that we thought about NOI. Let's take a look at the configuration. Let's look at what our value is in the property right now. Let's make a change, see how that affects, and then let's make a change in the actual criteria item itself and see how that affects our assessment in our property. So I'm going to go ahead excuse me, and break out of our slide deck there, and we'll go live in the system. So let's hop into our utilities menu panel again, and let's head into our risk assessment settings. And let's just take a quick look at how we have our tax credit inspection currently configured. So you can see, I've got 5 different values there that I'm using with different point scores, with, an incomplete inspection giving 5 points, all the way up to a superior inspection giving no points. Okay, so let's go back to our property and take a look at where is our tax credit inspection sitting right now. Remember, our latest completed, that's going to give us a point value within our current risk assessment. So remember, my 2019 is my latest completed, and I can see my overall results there on my list screen of needs improvement. But let's just pop in and refresh ourselves that we can access that results tab. And we can see that we've got that overall inspection results kind of near the bottom there, sitting at a needs improvement, okay? So remember, we have that configured with a point value right now of 3. So let's pop back into that risk assessment and take a look at what that looks like in the risk assessment. Where do we view that? Again, looking at our system generated criteria tab, to see that 3 points assigned to this assessment right now. So I can, if I want to, scroll down my screen, I can collapse those groupings to move myself down the screen to consider other criteria. Okay, just wanted to kind of show everybody that. But again, we're looking at that tax credit inspection. And remember that my current status on that is sitting at a needs improvement. And so I'm receiving a point value of 3 right now, okay? Which is putting my total or final, not final yet because we're not finalized, really total, but my total assessment score for this risk evaluation is 21 points right now. So let me hop back into that inspection, and I'm going to make an adjustment to that overall result. And then we'll come back and take a look at how that affects that point value. Remember, our risk assessment was sitting at 21. So let me go ahead and I'm going to kind of up or improve the overall result for this particular inspection. Okay, so I'm going from a needs improvement to a superior. So let me do a save there. And then I'm going to hop back into that risk assessment and see how that affects that overall risk score that I had. Okay, so remember, and I can even see that right here on my list screen. Remember, I went from a needs improvement giving me a value of 3 to a superior giving me a value of 0. So now my overall risk score went from 21 down to 18. Okay. So that's looking at how does that affect from the property level. So let's take a moment and just look at one more example. If I modify the points on those different evaluation items, how does it then affect my risk score? So let's do something here that we haven't looked at yet. When I have a superior overall inspection result, I'm going to subtract 4 points from the risk score because, right, superior means they're in great shape. So I'm giving them a good amount of credit for having a great looking inspection like that. So let's go back into that property and see how that changes that score overall for the property. Okay, so again, coming back to my property, heading into my risk assessment records there from my left nav, and then clicking into my pending records. So remember, I was sitting at an 18 for my overall score, but readjusting that superior value to select 4 points brings me down to a total of 14 for that property. And it moved my property from that at-risk status to back to a watch status. Okay, so again, highlighting that concept that, you know, depending on how we have our points configured, a few points there can really move us in and out of those different statuses for that overall assessment. Okay. And I think, guys, that brings us to the end of our risk session for today. Again, I hope this was valuable to you. I hope this gives you the tools and the confidence to get into the system and start tinkering about and getting your model into the system to use live. Thank you so much, everybody. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Ryan.
Really great job. Thank you so much for presenting the risk engine in ProLink HFA. And thank you everyone for joining the session. I hope you found great value in this session. As a reminder, a copy of Kelly's PowerPoint is available on the conference platform right here. And you can always come back to the conference platform for next 90 days to watch any of the session recordings again. And the survey is available here, so give us a feedback on this particular session. And you can type in any outstanding questions that were not answered during the session. And this concludes ProLink Tech Live 2022. I hope you enjoyed all or at least some of the 10 sessions we prepared for you this year. And for those who participate in Coffee and Bagel, we really appreciated your participation. And it was great seeing you. And thanks for stopping by and saying hi. And we greatly appreciate your participation and hope you're able to learn something new this year. And we'll do this again next year in November. And don't forget ProLink HFA webinar series, which will resume next year in February. It is a 45-minute session that takes place on the first Wednesday of each month from February through October. And typically each session is composed of 2 parts. We start with the business presentation to cover a topic from business or the industry point of view. And then we cover a software demo that is relevant to that particular topic. So you'll see webinar registration going out in January. But if you like to stay in the loop, you can sign up for our monthly newsletter right on the conference homepage. So as we close this session out, you can go back to the main page and you'll see a little card that says ProLink monthly newsletter. So please sign up if you have not. And again, thanks for joining us. We'll be sending out a post-conference feedback survey to all attendees tomorrow. So please be on the lookout for that. And thanks again, everyone, for again attending this conference this year again, and have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.